So the talk today is tiny blessings. Anybody know what the definition of a blessing is? I just looked it up. Google is awesome for last minute. I'm going to include something in the talk. Blessing is defined as a gift or favor from God. Well, if you've been following along with what we mean with this teaching, when we start every prayer by acknowledging that there is only God, there is one power and presence that shares itself through and as and in every part of its creation, then everything is a gift of God. Everyone is a gift of God, and therefore everything is a blessing. So we're going to have to dive in a little bit to understand what tiny blessings are. Some people equate blessings with miracles, and I've been living in blessings all week. I'm going to get to tell some of the stories about them, which is just fun. Some people say that blessings are miracles. It's another one that I Googled. Actually, a miracle is, I'll get the actual definition. An event not explicable by natural or scientific laws. That's a miracle according to Wikipedia. A miracle is a backup singer according to Smokey Robinson.
I love that.
Different story. An event not explicable by natural or scientific laws. That means that a miracle is something that we can't explain. So the difference between a miracle and an ordinary is not how cool the thing is or how astounding or wonderful it is. The difference is whether or not we can explain it. Well, there's a word for that. Arrogance. Oh, well, I get to decide whether or not it's going to be a miracle or just an ordinary, scientifically provable, whatever it happens to be. We spend a lot of time thinking we know what we know. A couple of weeks ago I was talking about intuition. Intuition is when we know something, but we don't know why we know it. So it's the 1st of March, getting towards baseball season. I'm going to tell the story of umpire school. So it's the beginning of the season, and this reporter wants to do a different story. And instead of interviewing the coaches and the players and stuff, he said, I'm going to do a story about the umpires and calling balls and strikes. So he goes to where the umpires are doing their preseason whatever, and he goes and he finds the rookie umpire. It's the guy's first season in the major leagues. And he says, when the pitch comes across the plate, how do you know if it's a ball or strike? And the guy says, it's easy. I just call it like it is. It's a ball or a strike. The reporter writes it down and says, that's great. Because he's back in the hotel room that night. He's thinking, this is a pretty simple story. Maybe there's more to it than this. So he goes back the next day, and he finds somebody else. He finds a seasoned guy who's been doing this for a bunch of seasons and understands maybe more about what's going on. He has a conversation with the guy and asks him the same question. When you're standing behind home plate and the pitch comes in, how do you know whether it's a ball or a strike? And the guy says, I just call it like I see it. And he's writing that down. And that's different than what the first guy said. The first guy said, I call it like it is. The second guy is acknowledging that he has some participation in this. He's got a perspective and an orientation on what's going on. So there's a little more nuance to it than that. The reporter's thinking, wow, this is turning into quite a good story. Interesting little tale that we get to tell. And his little voice tells him, you should talk to somebody else as well. So he goes back the next day, and he finds the elder. He finds the guy who's been in the major leagues for the longest time. He's got the most experience, kind of got that attitude like, I've seen this all before. Has a conversation with him, asks the same question. How do you know if it's a ball or a strike? And the guy gives him a completely different answer. He says, until I call it, it's nothing. That's full participation, because that's true. Whatever happened, happened. Whatever he saw, he saw. But until he says ball or strike, nothing else can happen. So the way that we look at things, the way that we describe them, turns out to be pretty important. So, as I said, the title of the talk is Tiny Blessings. And the part of my mind that comes up is who you call them tiny. This is going to sound incredibly geeky, but after the memorial service yesterday afternoon, I was visiting with the Spock family, and the conversation turned to the Hubble Deep Field shot. Yes, we actually talk about that sort of thing, other than on Sunday mornings. And just so you know, the Hubble Deep, come on in, make yourself comfortable. The Hubble Deep Field shot is from the Hubble telescope, which is an orbiting telescope, and it's been taken incredibly detailed pictures of the known universe for decades now. And so the scientists decided what they wanted to do, see what's in empty space. So they knew that there was a little tiny patch of empty space, and it's really tiny. If you were to take a grain of sand and hold it out at arm's length, that's about how big the patch of sky that they were looking at that was empty, that they're going to take a picture of. So it's pretty small. And they took a time-lapse photograph of that little tiny space. It went on for 2 weeks to get enough light into the telescope. And when they looked at the picture that they had received of this empty piece of sky, there were thousands of galaxies in it. And each of those galaxies has millions of stars in it. Who you calling empty? Who you calling tiny? Okay? So when we're talking about miracles in our lives, we think about the big miracle. Somebody who has a cancer diagnosis and suddenly it's gone. Not that it's cured. My favorite one is when the doctors are apologizing because the first test must have been incorrect because there's no sign that the person ever had cancer. And I've been involved in those on more than one occasion. Or the person who sets their intention to live a life of prosperity. And far more quickly than anybody would have written it down in a novel, they're suddenly living a life of prosperity. Those are what we call the big miracles. All the changes that can happen in our lives, individually or collectively, with society, with countries, all the rest of it. So we tend to categorize them as big miracles and little miracles. Put a Post-it note on that just for a second, because if you're in the awareness that in a little tiny speck of sky there are thousands of galaxies, the biggest thing that could possibly happen on this planet is a tiny miracle. So the question is, how big is your tiny miracle? Cataclysmic tiny miracle? It's just the way that the pieces are fitting together. So I was away last weekend, got to spend time with my brother, which means that I was completely in my head, except when I specifically took some time off to meditate and be peaceful, because that's the way my brother is. And when I got back home, I needed to reconnect because I have committed myself to working full-time in ministry, and it's been going pretty well. There's always the exciting, curious part, like what am I actually doing for a living and where's the money coming from and all the rest of those things. The things that help me do the inhale without necessarily making me feel comfortable exhaling. So in my Monday morning meditation, I set the intention once again to be the presence of healing and good. That's the truth of who I am, to allow my light to shine and allow my participation to be a benevolent presence for other people. I just kind of relaxed and settled into that. And later in the day on Monday, a sister spiritual community asked me if I would help teach their practitioner class. Out of the blue, because that's the way these things happen, okay? So there's a tiny miracle that felt like it was a pretty big miracle. And it turns out that there were a bunch of tiny blessings that happened along the way to that, because I already knew these people. The person who called me was a practitioner there, and I had been on his practitioner panel. This was those tiny miracles of just saying yes all along the way, to being clear about the good that I was inviting, allowed this next huge or tiny miracle to happen. And it's wonderful, and the pieces are fitting together beautifully. And then later in the day on Monday, I managed to connect up with a wonderful friend who we met at the International New Thought Alliance conference last summer, Donna Christine Park. And she's one of those people who's just delightful. She's all over the place. She's a freelance volunteer when she goes to those meetings. She says whatever needs to be done, she says she's going to do it. She's not going to put herself on a team. She's just going to do it. And she's like, okay, we must need greetings. I'm hugging people. So Donna Christine is just that sort of person. And She had left a message, so I called her back, and what she wanted to know is if Reverend Dave or I would be interested in serving the International New Thought Alliance, which, by the way, is an organization that Ernest Holmes was the president of for a while, as a district president. I said, yes. I looked at the documentation. They had Eastern Pennsylvania, and then New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts or something all together. It's a little weird. So some back and forth with the International New Thought Alliance. I said, we can just make New Thought Philadelphia be like the Delaware Valley, you know, southeastern Pennsylvania, South Jersey, Delaware. Turns out there's somebody else who's already in Delaware who I have now met because of all of this. And they said, well, we actually want to have it look like there's more people. So Reverend Dave is the district president for South Jersey, and I'm the district president for Eastern Pennsylvania. And tiny blessings. Yeah, thank you. And this was from getting to know Donna Christine at the conference that we went to. And that was about saying yes to the national or the international organization. Because it's 105 years they've been having an annual Congress. We went to the 104th, but it was about, and we knew about this group. We haven't done anything with them. We just keep on saying yes and yes and yes, and the tiny blessings turn into more tiny blessings, turn into more tiny blessings. When I first got into this teaching, I was in Religious Science International. That was the branch organization. So that was one of the big ones in religious science. The other one is the United Church of Religious Science, and they had split apart in the late 50s. Because Ernest Holmes, who was the guy at the top, had a difference of opinion. And in the Religious Science International, the organization I was part of, there were some luminaries, some really, really cool people. And one of them is J. Scott Neal. So Jay wrote a spiritual mind treatment, a prayer, that went in Creative Thought magazine every month for like 30 or 40 years. He was always there. He was always present. He was speaking at the annual conferences. He was renowned and well-known. And we had a chance to get to know Jay because he joined the affiliated New Thought Network, which we're part of. And Reverend Dave and I have actually spent some time with him. And on Wednesday night, he called me to say, I hear you're going to be part of the International New Thought Alliance. That's awesome. So he was on the phone to cheerlead me. There's a tiny blessing or a huge blessing that came out of tiny blessings, and it was just awesome for me. These are prayer work stories because, as I want to remind you, this started out on Monday morning with me saying I am sharing my gifts and allowing the light to shine and allowing the love to flow and being a beneficial presence. And it turns out that the gift that showed up was in the conversation that I had with Jay, because J. Scott Neal loves telling stories about the good old days. He was an actor. He was in the Navy before he was an actor, and he was in the 1960s. He was doing all of this stuff, and he had an acting career. And he was doing voiceovers for cartoons, and had a career that was developing. And he was also studying how to be a religious science minister. His teacher was Fenwick Holmes, Ernest Holmes' brother, and made an indelible impact on Jay because he talks about Fenwick Holmes a lot. But the gift that J. Scott Neal gave me on Wednesday night was to tell me what Fenwick Holmes had told him in the 60s when he had a successful acting career and was thinking about going into ministry. Fenwick said, if you're going to be successful in ministry, don't give yourself an alternative. Go all in. And that's so true. And that's a leap of faith. And this is not the first time that I've heard about this sort of thing, but to hear Fenwick Holmes say it to me through J. Scott Neal, who's calling because of all the little tiny yeses, kind of reaffirms this is the way things work. Tiny blessings. Who are you calling tiny? It's nothing until you call it. We get to decide what the blessings are. We've been teaching we call it a prosperity class. It's actually a spiritual practices class disguised as a prosperity class. Yes, if there are financial issues along the way, those get resolved. But We're doing a module on forgiveness work. We've done tithing. We've done basically everything that we're going to do as a spiritual practice to deepen into it. And my favorite quote in the Bible about blessings is actually about tithing as well. And I'm going to turn my phone back on so that I can actually read it. Usually with a Bible, you just open it up and it goes to the page. But with the online one, it has to think about where it was and give you a little promotional message before it reminds me. This is Malachi 3:10. It says, "Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house. And prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough to receive it." I shall pour you out such a blessing that there shall not be room to receive it. You know what that's called? A tiny blessing. Because it's an infinite power. It's an infinite power that is saying yes to every positive, powerful, personal, and present intention that we set to it. It always works. It works for me, works for you, works for Smokey Robinson. The fact that we can't explain it doesn't mean that it's not going to work or that it's questionable. It's where faith comes in. If I can explain scientifically why something's going to happen, then it's easier for me to believe that it's going to happen. We have such good descriptions of gravity and electricity and chemistry and biology and those sorts of things that we can explain why all sorts of things happen, and then we have the confidence to be able to explain that again. We talk of the world of cause and effect. And again, in science, the cause is pushing on something and the effect is having it move. And in our New Thought philosophy, we understand that the cause is always choosing to push it. The first effect is pushing it, and then the secondary effect is it moving. Everything begins in consciousness. We do everything in consciousness first. That's the first cause, is consciousness. And after that, everything else unfolds. In fact, the first cause was the infinite power saying, "Let there be." And we are continuing to be that presence, letting things be. So we are free to choose. And then we're free to accept our blessings. And as we evolve and grow and learn more things, we have more explanations of why something happened. We've got this ambition idea that we can prove scientifically that prayer works. Billions of people all over the planet know that prayer works. But according to the scientific method, it hasn't been proven. And that's because you need a double-blind study. And if there's only one mind and one power and presence, it's really hard to set that up because who's going to be blind? You need somebody to volunteer for it. I've got some ideas, not going to go into detail. That's a whole nother talk. We're on tiny blessings now. So the tiny blessings, maybe they're the seed blessings. Maybe those are the seeds of intention, of positivity that we're planting, the invitations for a little bit more good to come into my life. Because if I can make room for just a little more good, then that good will make room for a little more good, a little more good, and a little more good. And soon, my tiny blessings are actually going to be really big blessings. As they, to borrow Sarah's phrase, boomerang. Send them out and they come back. And it builds and it builds and it builds. What blessings can you have in your life? Anything. Anything. It says right here that it's inexplicable by natural laws. So, if we can use that, then your miracle can be anything. That blessing can come in any direction. For somebody who's looking for a relationship and shows up as a relationship. Somebody who's looking to have more prosperity. It's the first of the month. Did you know? Yeah. A friend of mine once defined wealthy as not recognizing or not remembering it's the first of the month. For people with a health challenge, the relationships might not matter nearly so much. What they're focused on is their health and their physical well-being. And it's possible for those to show up as the blessings and the miracles as well. Oh, by the way, if we decide that we want to be healthy and vital, it probably behooves us to, as we are aware of it, to take care of our body. So if I know that exercising is good for me, and I say I want to be perfectly healthy and strong without exercising, then where's my belief system? My belief is that I want something, and the universe is going to have to give me something that I already believe is impossible. Well, inexplicable is different than impossible. So I can eat healthy, whatever that means. And if I, have a choice of smoking or not smoking, or using medications or not using medications, I can make those choices and do my part. And the universe gets to say yes to me and build me up. And my positive steps in that direction, those tiny blessings, all add up into the feeling of vitality. It works in every area of our lives. If somebody hates their job, the blessing can be them either getting a different job or stopping the hating. And we don't necessarily have to explain how that's going to happen. So the first thing we get to do is open ourselves up to the blessing, to recognize that we are complete participants in this creative universe. We are co-creating our life experience. We are saying yes at every moment. And when the pitch comes in, we get to call it. Call it good. Call it blessed. If the pitch isn't for you, let it go by and say, that was not over the plate. But be clear about what it is that you're seeing and participate and allow the good to come into your lives. Because the pitch is on its way to you now, and you deserve greatness. So it is. Thank you.